For today's lesson, we'll be talking about the prophets. There are many prophets in the Old Testament. Just in general, what is a prophet? A prophet, basic, is someone who speaks for God. So when you look at Moses, go back to Moses. Remember him? How you had God, and you had Moses, and you had Moses' brother Aaron. And the purpose of Moses was to speak for God, and the purpose of Aaron was to speak for Moses. Moses was such an important person, he almost had his own prophet. And so they were an intermediator. You had the people, and you had God, and the job of the prophet was to go from God to the people. Generally speaking, the people could not go directly to God because the people were so sinful that if God went to them, they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't get God. And so the job of the prophet was to connect to God and the people. The prophets in the Old Testament were not usually liked very well. They were hated by one person or the other. They were typically always persecuted. Always. And the reason is because the prophets, they called out sin. And generally, people don't like it when you call out their sin. When you call out people's sin, they get rather upset quite frequently because people don't like to be wrong. And so the basic definition of a prophet is one who speaks for God. Now, there are 4 major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and there are 12 minor prophets. What's the difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet? It's very simple. Major prophets have longer books. Minor prophets have shorter books. If you read the minor prophets, their books are always very short. In fact, Obadiah is the shortest book of the Old Testament. Our optional lesson this week will be, I will read Obadiah and show you the passion and the fire that the prophets had. Now, the short books of the minor prophets are some of the best books of the Old Testament. Like some of the most famous ones, take Jonah, for instance. Jonah's a very, very famous book. If you never heard of Hosea, he's got a really, really good book and a really interesting life. Now, the main themes of the prophets, your textbook has 3. I kind of added a 4th. The first theme of the prophet is there is one God and only one God, Yahweh. So as you know, the Israelites, they would often worship these other gods, these Canaanite gods, like Baal. As we talked about in class, they would worship these Canaanite gods because, well, these Canaanite gods, they expected less of the Israelites. And honestly, if the Canaanites are doing good, the Israelites would worship their God because, well, the Canaanite gods are giving them something. Let's worship that God. Maybe that God will be good to us too. And the prophets would constantly bring them back. There's only one God. The second theme comes off the first one, and that one God is holy, and he denounces and he demands that we renounce sin. The God of the Israelites was different from the God of the Canaanites. The gods of the Canaanites, they wanted child sacrifice. They wanted sacrifice of individuals. They had called prostitutes. They did not have a strict moral code. The Israelite gods, their God wanted a strong, strict moral code. Now the prophets typically preached punishment if sins were not repented, and prosperity if they listened to God's warning. It's pretty simple. Think of the cycle of sin way back in Judges. If they did not worship other gods and they did not sin against God, they wouldn't have been conquered by their enemies. And the Israelite prophets continually said, follow God, follow God, follow God. And the Israelites continually said, no, I'm not going to do that. And because of that, that's why you have the Assyrians coming in. That's why you have the Babylonians coming in. The third message of the prophets is one I kind of added. It goes with the third one in your textbook and the fourth one that I'm going to go over. But the third message of the prophets is that God has not abandoned you. And the purpose behind this message was in times when things are going really, really, really bad, and destruction and of woe and of hardship, they needed the message that God hasn't abandoned you. And this is an important message because imagine this. Your nation's been destroyed. Your people have taken in exile. Your army is in ashes. Your kings are gone. Your land has been burnt. Your temple has been destroyed. Your home has been destroyed to the ground. Everything about your life is bad. There is nothing good. It may seem that God has abandoned you and all hope is lost and everything is just going to hell. Well, the main theme behind this is that the prophets wanted to say again and again and again, okay, bad times have coming. Bad times are here, but it's not the end. It's rather interesting. If you look at the history of the world, whenever really, really bad things happen, people think it's the end of the world. They think the world's going to end. And the reason why that is, you see it all throughout human history. Whenever bad things happen, I think it's the end because they think that there is no hope. They think there is no way up. And it shows that whenever bad things are going to happen, whenever bad things do happen, it's not the end. There is hope. There is a future. And that's what the prophets kept saying again and again and again. No matter how bad things get, God hasn't left you. God hasn't abandoned you. There is a tomorrow. The sun will come out. The fourth theme, and you see this hidden a lot, but you see it frequently amongst a lot of the prophets. You see it in Isaiah, you see it in Daniel, you see it in the other prophets. And the fourth theme is that the Messiah is coming. The prophets, they keep speaking about the Messiah again and again and again. However, the thing about this is the prophets themselves don't know what the Messiah exactly is going to look like. They knew that there was going to be a Messiah. Now, what they knew was they knew the Messiah was going to come from the house of David. They knew the Messiah was going to free the Israelites. They knew the Messiah was going to be powerful and strong. However, from the house of David, they expected a king, not just a regular carpenter. He was going to free the Israelites. They expected, the people expected a Messiah that was going to free them from foreign oppression and free them militarily and politically, not someone who's going to free them from their sin, their slavery to sin. They expected someone who's going to be powerful. We're talking about political, military power. But what they got was a Messiah who was spiritually, religiously powerful and strong, in both miracles and words and deeds. Now, the prophets, they typically did words. They spoke a lot. They received a message from God to go to the people or go to the king. And their message, they preached usually, thus says the Lord. In the Old Testament, you'll see the prophets say, thus says the Lord a lot. And the reason is because they're showing that these aren't their words. These aren't their ideas. They're God's ideas. These come from God. Now, they often use poetry and proverbs, and they use satire occasionally. Just think back to Nathan. Remember Nathan's parable, whenever David had his sin with Bathsheba, and he murdered Uriah. Nathan had the parable about the one man with the one lamb, and then the rich man with many, many flocks, Nathan's parable. He used a parable to teach. Hosea, we'll talk about Hosea a little bit next week. Hosea, he showed how Israelite was unfaithful. So he literally purposely married an unfaithful wife. Could have possibly even been a prostitute. And he did that purposely to show how the Israelites, they constantly turn away from God like an unfaithful spouse. So his entire life was a metaphor for Israel. Now, as you know, they also did miracles occasionally. We just looked at the miracles of Elijah and Elisha. So occasionally prophets did miracles, but that wasn't their main thing. Prophets weren't so much about doing miracles. They're more about preaching. This week, I am going to give you an assignment, a reading assignment from the textbook. In this assignment, you are going to read a few pages, and then there are a number of questions, 15 to be exact, that I want you to answer. This is just an overview, an introduction to the prophets. Later on this week, we'll be talking a little more in depth about the prophets. This is an introduction of who they are, what they did. Read these pages, do this work, and I will see you next time. God bless you all.